Days before my company's 20th anniversary celebration, my son called and said, "Dad, my wife and I wouldn't miss it for anything." I believed him. The next evening, as more than 400 guests filled the ballroom, my assistant quietly showed me a photo of them relaxing on a beach. I stared at the 2 empty seats reserved for them, then invited my late wife's son to sit beside me instead. Live on stage, I handed him a surprise gift worth $270,000. 3 hours later, my phone showed 120 missed calls. "I'm so grateful you're here with me today on Revenge, Dad. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from, your country, your city? I love knowing who's in this community." This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but every lesson in it is something worth carrying. My name is Robert Bennett, and the night my company celebrated 20 years of existence was also the night I finally understood the difference between a son and a stranger wearing your last name. The Crystal Ballroom in downtown Houston could hold 500 people. That evening, it held 412. I knew, because Sarah had given me the final head count while I was straightening my tie in the hallway mirror, the same tie Helen had picked out for me 11 years ago. The one with the thin navy stripe, she said, made me look like someone worth listening to. I had worn it to every important occasion since the day she died, and tonight felt important enough to deserve it. The ballroom was alive. Caterers in white jackets moved between tables with quiet precision. The audio technicians near the stage kept adjusting levels, their voices low through their headsets. 3 enormous screens hung above the main platform, cycling through photographs from the past 2 decades, images I had approved weeks ago, but still could not look at for too long without feeling something loosen in my chest. I stood near the entrance and watched it all. My hands folded in front of me, and I thought about the 2 chairs at the head table. They had been set up exactly as I had requested, white cards engraved in clean black lettering. The one on my immediate left read, "Ryan Bennett, son of the founder." The one beside it read, "Ashley Bennett, daughter-in-law." I had asked Sarah to place them there personally, not leave it to the event coordinator. I wanted to be sure. I wanted everything to be right. Ryan had called me 4 days earlier, and his voice had carried that particular warmth it only produced when he needed something from me or wanted me to feel reassured. "Dad, I wouldn't miss this for anything," he had said. 20 years, that's your whole life in that building. Ashley and I will be there early, I promise." I had believed him. The way you believe your children even when some older, quieter part of you has started to wonder whether you should. I was standing by those chairs running my thumb along the edge of Ryan's name card when Sarah appeared at my elbow. Her expression was the kind that people wear when they are delivering news. They genuinely wish they did not have to deliver. Lips pressed, tight eyes, carrying an apology that her voice had not yet formed. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "I think you should see something." She held out her phone. The screen showed an Instagram post. The account belonged to Ashley. The photograph had been taken within the last 30 minutes. The timestamp confirmed it. In it, Ryan and Ashley stood on a white sand beach, the turquoise sprawl of the Pacific behind them, each holding a cocktail glass with a tiny paper umbrella. They were both wearing sunglasses. They were both smiling the wide, effortless smile of people who had not thought once about where they were supposed to be. The caption read, "Finally escaping work and obligations. Taking the vacation we actually deserve. Life is too short to spend it in ballrooms." My thumb stopped moving against the name card. I read the caption a second time, then a third. Not because I did not understand it, but because some part of me kept hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less clear. 2 days ago, Ryan had told me the Hawaii trip was canceled. A scheduling conflict, he had said. Nothing he could control. He and Ashley would absolutely be at the ceremony. The trip had never been canceled. He had looked me in the eye and told me it was. And I had nodded and said I was glad. And I had felt something warm move through me, the particular relief of a father who still believes his son means what he says. Sarah's hand moved slightly as if she wanted to take the phone back and spare me from holding it any longer. Her eyes were glistening at the corners, and she blinked fast the way people do when they are trying very hard not to cry in front of their employer. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know whether to show you, but I thought you'd want to know before the camera started rolling." I handed the phone back to her. My hand was steady, which surprised me because my chest felt like something inside it had just quietly collapsed. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "That was the right call." She nodded, pressing her lips together again. I looked at the two chairs, Ryan's name, Ashley's name, the white cards clean and certain, announcing an arrival that was never going to happen. Ashley had posted that photograph without a second thought, because she had not considered even for a moment that a company anniversary livestream might reach beyond the circle of employees and partners she had long ago decided did not matter. She had underestimated the reach of what I had built. It was, I would come to realize, the first in a long series of things she would underestimate. I turned to Sarah. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but it did not waver. "I need you to do something for me," I said. She straightened immediately, the professionalism returning to her posture, even as her eyes were still wet. "Of course, anything." I looked at the two name cards one last time. "Take them down," I said. "Both of them." Sarah stared at me for a moment, her breath catching audibly. Then she gave a single firm nod and walked toward the head table without another word. I stayed where I was watching her go and felt the strange aching calm of a man who has just made a decision he should have seen coming for years. The ballroom filled around me, 412 people, none of them knowing yet that tonight was about to become something none of us had planned for. While Sarah carried out my instructions, I stood alone and let 20 years walk back through that door. It started, as most things in my life did, with a building that should have been condemned. The year was 2004. I had leased a warehouse on the eastern edge of Houston for $800 a month, a concrete box with two broken skylights, a loading dock that groaned when you stepped on it, and a smell that suggested the previous tenant had stored something organic and forgotten about it. My entire operating capital fit inside a shoebox. My business plan was 3 pages long and full of optimism that I now recognize as the specific brand of delusion that only 39-year-olds are capable of sustaining. Helen sat at the kitchen table every night for the first 2 years, doing the books by hand because we could not afford accounting software. She never complained, not once. When I came home at midnight covered in grease and frustration, she would heat up whatever was left in the pot, sit across from me and say, "Tell me one thing that went right today." Some nights I had to think for a long time before I could answer her. She always waited. Helen had a son from her first marriage. His name was Ethan Cole, and he was 15 years old when she and I first got together, a quiet, watchful boy with his mother's eyes and a handshake that was too firm for his age, like he had been practicing it. He called me Sir for the first 3 years, not out of coldness, but out of a kind of careful respect that I later understood was his way of giving me room to prove myself. I never asked him to call me Dad. I told him once early on, "Call me whatever feels right to you. No pressure, no timeline." He had nodded seriously the way teenagers do when they are trying to act older than they are, and gone back to his homework. Ryan, my son from my first marriage, was 12 when I started the company. He visited on weekends and I took him to the warehouse, sometimes let him hand me tools and ask questions. He would lean against the workbench with his arms crossed, watching me work, and say things like, "Dad, when this gets big, I want to run the whole thing." I would laugh and ruffle his hair and tell him to finish his homework first. I believed that too. The way you believe the things your children say at 12 before life teaches them that wanting something and earning it are two entirely different conversations. Helen passed away 8 years after we married. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and leaves no room for negotiation. She was in the hospital for 6 weeks before the end. During those 6 weeks, Ryan visited twice. Both times he stayed less than an hour. He had a job by then, a social life, reasons that sounded reasonable when he said them out loud. Ethan slept in the hospital waiting room for 4 of those 6 weeks. A nurse eventually brought him a pillow. The night Helen died, I sat in the parking garage and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and cried in a way I had not cried since I was a boy, ugly heaving without any dignity at all. I stayed there for 40 minutes. When I finally walked back inside, Ethan was standing in the corridor outside her room, his back against the wall, his eyes red and swollen. He looked up when he saw me. His chin trembled. And then for the first time in 8 years, he crossed the hallway and put his arms around me and held on. He said one word into my shoulder, "Dad!" I could not speak. My throat had closed completely. I just held on to him and thought about Helen, sitting at that kitchen table doing the books, by hand asking me to find one thing that went right. That night in that corridor, Ethan was the thing that went right. I was still standing inside that memory when I heard footsteps behind me, firm, unhurried, familiar. I turned around. Ethan was walking through the ballroom doors, carrying a toolbox, 2 hours early as always. Ethan set the toolbox down near the stage entrance and crouched beside a tangle of cables that the audio crew had flagged as a grounding problem. He had not been asked. He had simply arrived, seen something that needed fixing, and fixed it. That was the most Ethan thing I had ever witnessed, and I had witnessed it hundreds of times. I walked toward him. "Nobody called you about that," I said. He looked up, brushing dust from his knee. "The sound guy texted me yesterday, said he was worried about feedback during the video segment." He shrugged one shoulder. "Figured I'd come early and take a look. You could have just forwarded the message to maintenance." Ethan smiled, the quiet, slightly lopsided smile he had inherited directly from his mother. "I could have," he said, "but then I wouldn't get to see your face when they play the 1994 warehouse photos on a 40-foot screen." I laughed despite myself. It was the first genuine laugh I had produced all evening, and it loosened something in my ribs that had been wound tight since Sarah showed me that photograph. Ethan stood wiping his hands on a cloth from his back pocket, and then he actually looked at me, not the polite glance of someone checking in, the real kind, the kind his mother used to give me across the dinner table when she knew something was wrong and was deciding whether to say so. "Ryan's not coming," he said. It was not a question. My jaw tightened for just a moment before I brought it back under control. "No." Ethan absorbed that without flinching, but his eyes darkened a flash of anger on my behalf that he swallowed before it could fully form. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be." I glanced toward the head table where Sarah was already reaching for the first name card. "I've made my peace with it." That was not entirely true, but it was the version of the truth I needed to say out loud in order to get through the next 3 hours. I turned back to Ethan and pointed to the chair on my immediate left, the one that had, until 4 minutes ago, carried Ryan's name. "Sit there tonight." Ethan's head came up fast, his eyes wide. "That's Ryan's seat. Ryan is in Hawaii," I said. "That seat belongs to whoever is standing beside me. Tonight, that's you." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and I watched something move across his face, not pride exactly, but something more complicated than that. The expression of a man who has spent years not asking for recognition and is suddenly being offered it in the most public way imaginable in a room full of cameras in front of 400 people. "Dad." "Ethan." My voice came out gentler than I intended. "Sit down, please." He pressed his lips together hard, and his eyes went bright at the corners, the kind of brightness that comes right before a person decides, with great effort, not to cry. He nodded once. Sarah appeared at my elbow, both name cards in her hand. She held them carefully the way you hold something that meant something, even if it should not have. I took Ryan's card and looked at it for one long moment, the clean engraving, the careful lettering, the name I had given him, and then I handed it back to Sarah without a word. She carried both cards away. I did not watch her go. Instead, I walked to the supply table near the kitchen entrance where the event coordinator had arranged floral centerpieces. I found what I was looking for almost immediately, a single white rose separated from one of the arrangements sitting in a small glass of water. I carried it back to the head table and placed it on the empty chair beside Ethan. Ethan looked at the flower. His throat moved. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to just above a whisper. "Mom, she would have been in the front row," I said. "She would have cried through the entire video segment and then insisted she wasn't crying." A sound escaped Ethan that was halfway between a laugh and something that hurt the kind of sound grief makes when it catches you off guard in a public place. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, steadying himself, shoulders rising and falling with one slow breath. Around us, guests were beginning to fill the room. I could feel the shift in the air, the growing murmur of 400 people finding their seats, the warm buzz of an evening that had not yet become what it was going to become. Several people near the front had already noticed the changes at the head table. I could see them leaning toward each other, eyebrows raised, questions forming. I did not explain myself to any of them. I sat down beside Ethan, straightened my tie, Helen's tie, and looked out at the room that 20 years of my life had built. "Ready?" I asked. Ethan squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and looked straight ahead at the stage. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm here." That was enough. That had always been enough. The lights dropped at exactly 7 o'clock, and 400 people went quiet all at once. That particular hush that falls over a crowd when they sense something real is about to happen, not just something scheduled. The screens behind the stage lit up with the first photograph. There I was, 39 years old, standing in front of that condemned warehouse on the east side of Houston, squinting into the sun with a hard hat, 2 sizes too big, and an expression that said, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Laughter rippled through the room. I smiled, but my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the image. When the video ended, I walked to the podium. 400 faces looked back at me. Camera operators held their positions. The live stream counter in the corner of the monitor near the stage read, over 2,000 viewers and climbing. I adjusted the microphone, looked out at all of it, and decided that tonight was not a night for a prepared speech. 20 years ago, I said, a bank turned down my loan application 3 times. The 4th banker I met took one look at my business plan, slid it back across the desk, and told me to come back when I had something more realistic. I paused. I never went back to that bank, but I thought about him every single year after that. More laughter, warmer this time. I told them about the early years, honestly, the missed payrolls, the contracts that fell through the winter. We ran the heat in the warehouse only on the days a client was scheduled to visit. I watched people in the audience lean forward. A woman in the 3rd row pressed her hand over her heart. Then I told them about 3 years ago. In the spring of 2021, this company nearly died, I said. The laughter faded completely. We lost our largest client in a single phone call. A loan recall followed 2 weeks later. Our cash reserves gave us approximately 6 weeks of runway. I sat in this building at 2 a.m. and genuinely did not know if we were going to survive. The room was absolutely still. Our VP of Business Development was traveling at the time, a conference networking opportunities, the kind of trip that sounds important until the building is on fire. I kept my voice neutral. He came back without a single new contract. I looked down at Ethan in the front row. He was watching me with his jaw set tight, his hands folded in his lap, clearly sensing what was coming and wishing I would not say it. I said it anyway. The person who saved this company was Ethan Cole, our head of engineering, and my stepson. I heard the murmur move through the crowd. He worked 19 consecutive days without a day off. He found a design flaw in our production line that cut operating costs by nearly 30%. He flew to 3 cities in 8 days to personally convince former clients to come back. I stopped, took a breath, and then he did something he told me never to tell anyone. The room held its breath. He mortgaged his house, I said, his own home, to make sure that every single person in this company received their paycheck on time while we restructured. A sound moved through the audience, not quite a gasp, not quite applause, something in between. Several people turned to look at Ethan. He stared at the floor, his jaw working color rising in his face. Carol Simmons. Our CFO, sitting 2 rows back, pressed both hands over her mouth. Richard Hale, our company attorney, closed his eyes briefly and exhaled. Ethan's shoulders had gone rigid. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet. Not the polite managed kind of wet you produce at ceremonies. The real kind. The kind that comes from being seen after years of expecting not to be. He asked me never to make this public, I said. I kept that promise for 3 years. I looked directly at him. I'm breaking it tonight because some debts can't stay private forever. The applause started slowly and then rose until I could feel it in my sternum. Ethan pressed his fist against his mouth, his whole body tight with the effort of holding himself together in front of 400 people. But I was not finished yet. That wasn't the only time Ethan put everything on the line for this family, I said. The applause faded. The second time, it wasn't the company he saved. It was me. 14 months ago, Ethan and I went hiking in the hill country west of Austin. It was his idea. He said I spent too many weekends inside the office and needed to remember what dirt smelled like. I told him I remembered exactly what dirt smelled like. He took me anyway. The trail was steeper than the map suggested. I was doing fine until I wasn't. One misplaced step on a wet limestone shelf, and then there was nothing under my left foot, and everything happened at once. The drop, the impact, the sound my knee made against the rock that I will not describe, because some sounds stay with you longer than you want them to. I ended up on a narrow ledge about 20 feet below the trail. My phone had shattered on the way down. The temperature was dropping. My knee was wrong in a way that made standing impossible. Ethan was down to me in under 3 minutes. He used the safety rope from his pack, the one I had teased him about bringing, because I said we were not climbing Everest. We were walking a state park trail, and he secured it around both of us. Then he sat down on that ledge in the cold and held on, and he did not let go for 3 hours and 40 minutes until the rescue team reached us. He gave me his jacket within the first hour. When I told him he would freeze, he said, "I run hot. Stop arguing." His lips were blue by the time the paramedics arrived, but he would not admit it. Ryan found out that evening. He called the hospital the following morning. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. He said he was in the middle of a client dinner and could not get away, but he hoped I felt better soon. I told him I was fine. I was not fine, but that was beside the point. I looked out at the audience and let that sit for a moment. Some faces had gone tight with the particular discomfort of people recognizing a story they have heard a version of inside their own families. The people who show up, I said, are rarely the people you expect, and they are always the people you cannot afford to lose. I nodded to Richard Hale, our company attorney, who was already moving toward the podium with a folder under his arm. Richard had been with Bennett Industrial for 14 years. He was not a man who showed emotion easily, but tonight his jaw was set in the way that meant he was working to keep his expression professional. He placed the folder on the podium and stepped back. 3 years ago, I said, Ethan Cole mortgaged his home to keep this company alive. He has refused every attempt I have made to repay him. I opened the folder. He does not get to refuse this one. I lifted a single document from the folder and held it up. $270,000, I said. The exact amount of his mortgage plus 3 years of interest returned to him in full, effective tonight. The room erupted. Ethan's head snapped up. His face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: shock, confusion, protest, and then something that broke open completely. His eyes spilled over. He pressed both hands flat against his thighs, and his shoulders shook with the effort of containing something too large for the room. Furthermore, I said, raising my voice slightly over the applause, effective immediately, Ethan Cole is appointed Acting Chief Operating Officer of Bennett Industrial Systems. The board will conduct an independent performance review in 12 months. Another wave of applause. Somewhere in Hawaii, at a resort restaurant with ocean views and paper umbrella cocktails, a phone screen lit up with the Bennett Industrial livestream notification. Ryan saw it. I know because Marcus told me later that Ryan's hand knocked his glass clean off the table. Ashley grabbed his arm. Her face on the restaurant's security footage that Marcus would eventually pull showed something that was not surprise at all. It looked like calculation. Ryan called me 7 times in the next 10 minutes, then 20. Then the number stopped mattering. I did not answer. I left the ballroom at 10:45 after the last handshake and the last photograph and the last well-meaning colleague who wanted to tell me what a remarkable evening it had been. They were right. It had been remarkable. I was just too tired to feel it anymore. I drove to the old house, not the condo I had moved into after Helen died, the house. The one on Claremont Drive where Helen and I had lived for 16 years, where the kitchen still smelled like the lemon cleaner she preferred, where the wood floors still creaked in exactly the same place near the hallway closet. I still owned it. I had never been able to sell it. Some things you hold on to, not because they are useful, but because letting go would mean admitting something you are not ready to admit. I sat in Helen's chair by the window with my jacket across my lap and watched my phone light up in the dark. 120 missed calls. I counted them the way you count something you cannot quite believe, slowly twice arriving at the same number both times. Ryan, Ashley, Ryan, Ashley, Ryan again. A number I did not recognize that was almost certainly a relative who had seen the live stream. Ryan, Ashley. I put the phone face down on the side table. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the block. A car passed with its radio up too loud. The ordinary sounds of a neighborhood continuing its ordinary life, indifferent to the fact that mine had just cracked open in a banquet hall downtown. I thought about Ryan at 8 years old running into the warehouse on a Saturday morning, still in his pajamas, because I had forgotten to call and tell him I was running late. He had been so angry, that particular righteous fury that children produce when they feel abandoned, the kind that is really just fear wearing a louder coat. He had stood there in the middle of the concrete floor with his fists clenched and his bottom lip trembling and shouted, "You forgot about me." I had crouched down in front of him, grease on my hands and guilt in my chest, and said, "I never forget about you, not for 1 minute." He had believed me. The trouble was, I had believed it too. I reached over and turned Helen's photograph to face me. She was smiling in it, that particular smile she reserved for moments when she thought nobody was watching the unguarded one. I had taken the picture myself at a backyard cookout the summer before she got sick. She had not known I was looking. "He didn't come," I said out loud. The house had no answer for me. Houses never do. But there is something about saying a painful thing out loud in an empty room that makes it slightly more bearable, not better, just real. Acknowledged. My throat tightened until I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathe through it. I had told myself for years that Ryan's distance was a phase, that he was busy, that marriage changes people's priorities, and that was natural, and I was not going to be the kind of father who guilted his son for building his own life. I had told myself all of those things with great conviction, and most days I had almost believed them. Tonight, I could not hold any of them. He had lied to my face. He had chosen a poolside cocktail over 20 years of his father's life, and then he had watched the consequences of that choice on a restaurant television in Hawaii, and called me 120 times, not because he was sorry, but because something he wanted had just been given to someone else. I knew my son. I knew exactly what those calls were about. The phone lit up again on the side table. Ryan. I watched it until it stopped. Then I picked it up, went to the photo app, and opened the one picture I had saved from the ballroom that evening. Ethan on stage shoulders, shaking hands pressed flat against his thighs, trying with everything he had not to fall apart in front of 400 people. He had not asked for any of it. He had simply shown up. I set the phone down, leaned my head back against Helen's chair, and closed my eyes. My chest ached with a specific bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hour. 2 days later, my office door opened without a knock. Ryan had come home. He didn't knock. That single detail told me everything I needed to know about how Ryan had spent the past 48 hours not grieving, not reflecting, not sitting with the discomfort of what he had done. He had spent them building a case, rehearsing, arriving at the conclusion that he was the wronged party, and that the appropriate response to being wronged was to walk through his father's door without asking permission. Ashley came in behind him. She was wearing the kind of composed expression that takes effort to maintain jaw-set shoulders, back, eyes moving quickly around the room, the way a person's eyes move when they are calculating exits and advantages simultaneously. Ryan planted himself in front of my desk. His voice came out louder than the room required. "I want an explanation." I looked up from the document I had been reading. I did not stand. "Good morning, Ryan," I said. The deliberate calm seemed to irritate him more than anger would have. His hands curled at his sides. "Don't do that. Don't be reasonable at me right now. You humiliated us in front of the entire company, in front of the whole country. I honored someone who earned it," I said. "Those are different things." Ashley stepped forward, and her voice carried the polished precision of someone who had spent years in public relations. Every word chosen, every pause calculated. "Robert Ryan is your only biological son. Whatever your feelings about Ethan, this company has always been Ryan's future. What you did last Friday was a public declaration that it isn't." I set my pen down. "This company," I said, "is the livelihood of 912 people. It is not Ryan's future. It is not anyone's inheritance. It is a responsibility." I looked at Ryan directly. One that requires showing up. Ryan's face went red from the collar up. "I've worked here for 12 years. "You have." I opened the folder on my desk, the one I had been maintaining quietly for the past 18 months. "Would you like to talk about the Hendricks contract? You were lead on that negotiation. We lost it." I turned a page. "The Morrison account. You missed the quarterly review. Ethan covered it." Another page. "The board meeting in March. You sent a proxy. Ethan stayed until midnight." Ryan stared at the folder. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. "I've been watching my company," I said. "You happen to be in it." Ashley's composure cracked slightly, a tightening around her eyes, a breath that came out harder than she intended. "So that's it. 12 years of loyalty mean nothing because of one missed event." "It wasn't one missed event, Ashley." I kept my voice even, and you know that. Then I told them the part I had been holding back. 3 months ago, I said, I discovered that someone had been copying our shareholder registry and our financial performance reports, unauthorized copies. I reported it to Richard Hale the same day. I watched Ryan's face carefully. The red drained out of it. Richard advised me that without evidence of intent to use the documents harmfully, legal action wasn't appropriate, so I did something else instead. I leaned back in my chair. I quietly restricted access to our most sensitive files. Certain folders became unreachable from certain terminals. I paused. You never noticed, did you, Ryan? The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the kind that rings. Ryan's hands had stopped curling. They hung at his sides, now slightly open, like a man who has just dropped something and is watching it fall. That was a coincidence, he said. His voice had lost its volume entirely. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient, I said. Ashley touched Ryan's arm. Her fingers pressed down hard, a warning, not a comfort. We should go, she said quietly. Not yet. Ryan stepped forward, and there was something in his eyes now that I had not seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something colder. Something that made the back of my neck tighten. This isn't over. At that exact moment, the office door opened and Ethan stepped in, holding a procurement document that needed my signature. He took in the scene. In one glance, Ryan's posture, Ashley's hand on his arm, the folder open on my desk, and his expression stayed careful and neutral. Ryan turned and looked at him. I have replayed that look many times since then. There was nothing loud about it. No raised voice, no pointed finger. Just a long, steady look from a man who had just decided something, directed at a man who had no idea yet what had been decided. It was the look that started everything that came after. I'll come back, Ethan said quietly, already stepping back toward the door. Stay, I said. We're finished here. Ryan held Ethan's gaze for one more second. Then he turned, walked past Ashley, and left without another word. Ashley followed, her heels sharp against the floor, her face arranged into something unreadable. Ethan waited until the door closed. Then he looked at me, his brow creased with the specific concern of someone who has just walked into the edge of something larger than they can yet see. What was that about? He asked. I picked up the procurement document he had brought. Nothing yet, I said. Sign this and get back to the floor. But I knew even as I said it that I was wrong. It was already something. I just did not know how much. Before I tell you what Ryan did next, drop the number 8 in the comments so I know you're still with me. What he chose to do in the next 48 hours will change everything, and I don't want you to miss a single second of it. A quick note, some elements of the stories on this channel are fictional, shaped for reflection and entertainment. If that's not what you came for, no hard feelings, you can step away here. But if you're staying, buckle up. I found out later that Ryan and Ashley did not go home after leaving my office. They drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away on Westheimer Road and stayed for 4 hours. I know this because Marcus Reed, my head of internal security, a former fraud investigator with the Harris County Sheriff's Department, who had joined Bennett Industrials 6 years ago and whom I trusted more than most people I had ever employed, told me afterward, after he had pulled the parking garage footage and cross-referenced Ashley's credit card records. Marcus was thorough that way. He was thorough about everything. What happened inside that coffee shop, I also know not, because anyone was listening, but because Diana Walsh eventually told us all of it. Ashley ran the meeting. That was how Diana described it later, her voice flat with the particular exhaustion of someone recounting a thing they wish they had never agreed to. Ashley had a yellow legal pad, a pen, and the kind of focused energy that Ryan had always mistaken for support, but was in reality something much more self-directed. She laid out 3 steps. First, create fraudulent financial transactions inside the company's system, tie them to Ethan's name, and credentials make it look like he had been moving money to a ghost vendor. Second, surface a fabricated medical assessment suggesting Robert showed signs of cognitive decline following the hiking accident planned, enough doubt to make the board question his judgment. Third, bring both pieces to the board of directors, force a vote, remove Robert and Ethan simultaneously, and install Ryan as acting chairman before anyone had time to examine the evidence too carefully. Ryan sat across from her and listened. Diana told us his expression kept shifting, a man arguing with himself in real time, wanting the outcome badly enough to keep listening, past the point where he should have stood up and walked out. Ashley slid the legal pad across the table. You're not betraying him, she said. You're reclaiming what was always yours. Ryan picked up the pen. Diana Walsh was 29 when Ryan first hired her as his executive assistant. She was 32, now living in a studio apartment in the medical center district, working a temp job that paid $11 an hour because she had left Bennett Industrial 2 months earlier without another position lined up. Her mother was receiving treatment for ovarian cancer at a hospital in Austin. The bills were specific and relentless in the way that medical bills in this country always are, and Diana had been sending money home every month until the temp job made that nearly impossible. Ryan knew all of this. He had been her direct supervisor for 3 years. He knew exactly which pressure point to press. He met her at a diner near her apartment on a Tuesday evening. He brought an envelope. Inside it was enough cash to cover 4 months of her mother's treatment. He asked her for 3 things. Go into Ethan's office during off hours. Using a copy of his access badge, Ryan would arrange the duplication of the badge through a contact who knew how to clone the RFID chip embedded in company key cards. Cloning an access badge of that kind violated Texas Penal Code, Section 31.17, which covers unauthorized use of access devices, though Ryan did not mention that detail, and Diana did not think to ask. Swap the computer on Ethan's desk with a replacement device that was not registered in the company's asset system. Then use that unregistered machine to generate 3 wire transfers totaling $58,000 to a newly formed consulting company with no employees, no office, and no actual business, with Ethan Cole listed as the approving authority on every transaction. Diana told herself it was paperwork. She told herself it was victimless. She told herself that Ethan was a grown man with resources and that nothing truly bad would happen to him. She took the envelope. Over the next 3 days, she cloned the badge and swapped the computer. The wire transfers came later, the evening of October 14th, after hours when the floor was empty. And then she went back to Austin for the weekend to sit with her mother in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. And she did not sleep well for a single night of it, and she told herself that meant she was still a good person. She was wrong about that last part, but she was also the person who, 6 weeks later, would walk into a boardroom with a lawyer and make sure the truth came out. People are rarely one thing entirely. That is what makes them so difficult to judge and so impossible to write off. Carol Simmons had been my CFO for 11 years. In 11 years, she had never once walked into my office without knocking, and she had never once brought me a problem she had not already spent at least 2 hours trying to solve herself. That Thursday afternoon, she knocked once open the door and sat down across from me without being asked. She placed a single printed report on my desk and folded her hands on top of her knees. Her face had the careful, controlled expression of someone delivering news they have already made peace with, even though the recipient has not had the chance to do the same. "We have a problem," she said. The report showed 3 wire transfers processed through our accounts payable system over the previous 72 hours. The amounts were $4,100, $18,000, and $36,900, respectively totaling just under $58,000. Each transfer had gone to a company called Meridian Advisory Group, LLC, registered in Delaware 4 weeks prior, with no listed employees, no physical address, and no prior relationship with Bennett Industrial. The approving authority on all 3 transactions was listed as Ethan Cole. I read the report twice. Then I set it down and looked at the surface of my desk for a moment, not because I needed to think, but because I needed a second to let the shape of what I was looking at become fully clear before I responded. The tightening in my stomach had nothing to do with surprise. It had everything to do with recognition. I had been waiting in some quiet corner of myself for something like this to happen. I had simply hoped I was wrong about that. "Has Ethan seen this?" I asked. "Not yet," Carol said. "I came to you first." "Good." I set the report down. "Who else knows?" Myself, my deputy, and the system flagged it automatically to our compliance officer. She paused, pressing her hands more firmly together on her knees. "And this morning, before I saw the transactions, a news article appeared online. Anonymous source. It named Ethan specifically." She reached across the desk and slid her phone toward me. The headline read, "Stepson manipulates aging founder to seize company control. Insider claims financial misconduct." The article had details about the anniversary ceremony, the $270,000 payment, the COO appointment. Specific details. The kind that no journalist assembles through guesswork, the kind that require a source with direct access to internal communications. I read it once. Then I put the phone face down on the desk and breathed through my nose for 3 full seconds. Someone had planned this carefully. The transactions in the article were not separate events that happened to coincide. They had been coordinated. The money moved first quietly, and then the story placed to ensure that when the money was discovered, there was already a public narrative waiting to receive it, a frame built before the picture was taken. I asked Carol to send the compliance report to Richard Hale immediately, and to speak to no one else until she heard from me. She nodded, retrieved her phone from the desk, and left without another word, which was exactly why I had hired her 11 years ago. Carol Simmons understood that discretion was not a personality trait. It was a professional obligation, and she had never confused the two. Ethan appeared in my doorway 12 minutes later. He had clearly seen the article. His face was pale in a way that made the angles of it sharper, the pallor that comes not from shock, but from the specific fear of a person who understands exactly what is being done to them and cannot yet see the way out. When he spoke, his voice was controlled with the precise effort of a man who is frightened and has decided as a matter of principle not to show it. "I need you to tell me what's happening," he said. "Come in," I said. "Close the door." He sat down. His hands were pressed flat against his thighs, the same posture I had seen at the ceremony 6 days earlier, when I announced the $270,000 and the COO appointment, and his whole body had fought to contain something too large for a public room. But this was different. At the ceremony, the emotion had been gratitude and grief, and the complicated weight of being seen after years of expecting not to be. What I was looking at now was something colder. This was a man bracing for an impact he had not caused and could not yet measure. "I didn't approve those transactions," he said. His voice was completely steady. "I don't know what Meridian Advisory is. I have never heard that name in my life. I want you to understand that before we discuss anything else." "I know," I said. The two words landed between us, and Ethan stared at them for a moment, the expression of a person who has prepared themselves for an argument and found none waiting. He exhaled. It was a long, shaking breath that he tried to make quiet and did not quite succeed, and the sound of it, the involuntary tremor in it, told me more about the state he was in than anything he had said. His jaw tightened afterward, pulling the composure back into place through sheer force of will. "I want to hire my own attorney," he said. "Today. I need to protect myself, and I need to do it now. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I intend to do." I looked at him carefully. The request was completely reasonable. Any person in his position would have made it, and the fact that he was framing it as information rather than a question told me he had already decided. But the fact that he was telling me at all that he was sitting in this chair rather than making calls from the parking garage told me something else. He still trusted me enough to be in the same room with me while this was happening. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the most important thing. "Give me 72 hours, I said. "Not to ask you to be patient. I know what patience costs when your name is attached to something like this. I'm asking because I believe Marcus can clear you with hard evidence inside that window, and hard evidence in our hands before any external attorney gets involved gives us considerably more leverage in what comes next." I held his gaze. "If Marcus cannot deliver in 72 hours, if he finds nothing, or what he finds points anywhere, you don't want it to point you. Hire whoever you want, and I will personally cover the retainer. Every dollar of it, I promise you that." Ethan's jaw worked. His eyes moved across my face the way eyes do when a person is looking for something specific, not reassurance, but the particular quality of conviction that distinguishes a real promise from a kind one. A real promise has a different weight behind it. It costs the person making it something visible, and Ethan had known me long enough to read the difference. Whatever he found, it was enough. 72 hours, he said. "Not 1 minute more." "Not 1 minute more," I agreed. He straightened his collar with the automatic gesture of a man who uses small physical rituals to reset his bearing and walked out. I watched him cross through my assistant's office and disappear into the hallway, and I sat with the particular stillness that settles over you when you have just made a promise that matters and have not yet determined whether you can keep it. Then I picked up the phone and called Marcus Reed. Marcus arrived 4 minutes later, which meant he had already been somewhere on this floor, not unusual. Marcus had a quality of ambient presence in the building that I had long ago stopped trying to explain to people who had not worked with him. He simply tended to be nearby when things were about to require him. He was 45 years old, built like someone who had spent his 20s doing things he did not discuss at dinner parties, and possessed of a patience that I had come to think of as predatory, the kind that does not fidget or rush or fill silence with unnecessary words, but simply waits for the exact right moment to move, and then moves with a completeness that leaves nothing behind, it requiring cleanup. He sat down, took the compliance report from my desk without being offered it, and read it in under 2 minutes. Then he set it back down with the careful, deliberate placement of someone who treats documents as evidence even before they have been formally designated as such. He looked up. "Full access to the security system?" he asked. "Every server log, every camera feed, every badge entry record for the past 30 days. "Whatever you need," I said. "No restrictions, no oversight, except mine." Marcus nodded once. He was already somewhere else inside his head. I could see it in the way his eyes had gone slightly distant, focused on an interior calculation that had nothing to do with the room we were sitting in or the conversation we were technically still having. He was already building the architecture of what came next, laying out the sequence of steps before I had finished speaking. He stood. "One more thing," I said. He stopped. "The article," I said. "Someone placed it. Someone with access to internal details that are not public. That person either works here or has a direct line to someone who does." I looked at him steadily. "I need to know who. Not a theory, not a strong probability. I need something I can take into a boardroom." Marcus held my gaze for a moment. In 11 years, I had given him difficult assignments. I had never given him one where the circle of possible suspects included a member of my own family. He understood that without my saying it, because Marcus understood most things without being told. "I'll have something for you by Monday," he said. He walked out. I sat at my desk in the quiet he left behind and thought about Ryan sitting across from me 2 days earlier with his portfolio and his prepared arguments and the particular righteous anger of a man who has decided he is the wrong party. I thought about Ashley in the corner of my office calculating exits and advantages. I thought about the look Ryan had given Ethan when Ethan walked in to pick up a document, that long, cold, decided look. I had told myself I was reading it wrong. I knew by Thursday afternoon that I had not been reading it wrong at all. Marcus was being modest when he said Monday. He had something for me by Sunday morning. Marcus called me at 7:45 Sunday morning, not with results, just 4 words. "Come in, bring coffee." I was at the office by 8:15. Marcus was already at his desk, 3 monitors running simultaneously, a legal pad covered in handwritten notes beside his keyboard. He had not gone home. I could tell by the way his collar sat slightly wrong, rebuttoned in the dark, and by the 2 empty coffee cups already in his trash can. He did not waste time on preamble. "The camera was wrong," he said. He turned one of the monitors toward me and walked me through it methodically, the way a surgeon explains a procedure not to impress, but to make certain you understand exactly what you are looking at before he tells you what it means. The hallway security camera outside Ethan's office ran on a legacy recording system that had never been updated to sync with the company's main server clock. The discrepancy was 17 minutes. 17 minutes in which the camera's timestamp said one thing and the server log said something else entirely. Marcus had noticed the gap because he noticed everything. When he adjusted for the 17-minute offset and laid the camera footage against the server activity log, the picture changed completely. Ethan had badged into his office at 6:43 in the evening and badged out at 7:51. The 3 fraudulent wire transfers had been initiated at 8:04, 8:17, and 8:29. All of them after Ethan had already left the building. Someone else had gone in after him. Marcus pulled up the adjusted footage on the center monitor. A figure appeared in the hallway at 8:01, moving toward Ethan's office door. The figure was wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up and a baseball cap underneath 2 layers of obscured identity that told Marcus everything he needed to know about the level of premeditation involved. The figure used a key card to enter. The badge number matched Ethan's. "That's not Ethan's card," I said. "No," Marcus said. "It's a clone. Whoever went in there had a device capable of duplicating the RFID chip embedded in our access badges." He leaned back in his chair. "Cloning an access device of that kind violates Texas Penal Code Section 31.17, unauthorized use of an access device, and triggers federal charges under 18 United States Code 1029 if the duplication crosses state lines electronically, which it did. The cloning software routed through a cloud-based server registered in Nevada. The moment that transaction touched a server outside Texas, it became a federal matter, not just a state one." He let that sit for a moment. Then he moved to the 3rd monitor. The computer currently sitting on Ethan's desk is not the computer that was there 3 weeks ago, he said. I pulled the asset registry. The original machine registered to Ethan assigned to that office was logged as transferred to storage on October 3rd, the day before the anniversary ceremony. My jaw tightened. Who authorized the transfer? I asked. Marcus turned the legal pad toward me. One name was written at the bottom, circled twice. Diana Walsh. She was still technically an active employee on October 3rd, Marcus said. Her termination paperwork hadn't fully processed. She had system access for another 18 hours after she stopped coming in. He paused. She used it. Where is she now? Austin. Her mother is receiving treatment for ovarian cancer at a hospital there, University of Texas Medical Center. Diana has been staying nearby. He said it without judgment, just information. She's not hiding. She's just not here. I stood up and walked to the window. Below the parking lot was empty in the early morning light, the asphalt still dark from overnight rain. She didn't do this alone, I said. No, Marcus agreed. She had help acquiring the cloning device, and she had specific instructions about which machine to swap and which transactions to run. That level of detail about our internal systems required someone with current access and institutional knowledge. He paused. Someone like a VP of business development who worked here for 12 years. I turned from the window and looked at him directly. Can you prove it? Marcus picked up his pen and tapped it once against the legal pad. Not yet, he said, but I have an idea about how to find out how far this actually goes. And I think it goes further than Ryan. He looked at me with the particular steadiness of a man who has seen enough of the world to know that the worst possibilities are usually the ones worth examining first. I think Ashley has her own arrangement, he said. Separate from Ryan. I think she's been working on this longer than he has. My chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Show me, I said. Marcus's idea was elegant in the way that the best traps always are. It looked exactly like what the other side was hoping to find. He created a project file, 47 pages professionally formatted, carrying the Bennett industrial letterhead, and the kind of specific financial language that makes documents look real to people who want them to be real. The file described a proposed expansion into the Gulf Coast Industrial Corridor, projected revenues of $35 million over 3 years, 3 potential acquisition targets named with enough detail to be convincing internal cost structures that took Marcus 2 hours to fabricate convincingly. None of it was real. Every number was invented. Every target company was fictitious. Marcus placed the file inside a shared drive folder that appeared accessible to senior leadership, but was in reality a monitored environment. Every access attempt was logged with timestamp device ID and account credentials. He told no one except me and Carol who needed to know, in order to ensure the file did not accidentally surface in any legitimate business context. Then we waited. We did not wait long. 41 hours after Marcus created the file, a company called Pinnacle Manufacturing, Bennett Industrial's largest direct competitor in the Gulf Coast, market headquartered in Beaumont, Texas, submitted a formal letter of interest to 2 of the fictitious acquisition targets named in the document. The targets did not exist, which meant Pinnacle had not found them through any legitimate channel. They had found them through our file. Marcus pulled the access log. The account that had opened and downloaded the project file belonged to a deputy operations manager whose credentials had not been used in 11 days. Someone had logged in using his username and password from an IP address registered to a residential building in the River Oaks neighborhood of Houston. Carol ran the building's registered tenants against our employee database. Ryan and Ashley Bennett had leased a unit there for the past 3 years. The download had occurred at 11:22 in the morning on a Tuesday. Ryan had been in a meeting with our logistics team. At that exact time, I checked the calendar myself. He had been in the building visible accounted for. Ashley had not been anywhere near the office. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the expression he reserved for moments when a theory becomes a fact. She's been in contact with Pinnacle since before the ceremony, he said. This wasn't opportunistic. She didn't reach out to them because things went sideways at the ballroom. She had already made arrangements. He paused. What we downloaded from Pinnacle's submission records through a contact in their legal department who owed me a favor was a letter of intent, not a full contract. It's structured to activate only when Ryan holds an executive control position at Bennett Industrial. She needed his title to trigger it. He was the key, not the partner. I sat with that for a long moment. My son had spent 3 weeks trying to destroy Ethan's reputation, risking criminal exposure, burning through whatever trust remained between us, and the entire time his wife had already sold the company out from under him to a competitor in Beaumont. Ryan had believed he was fighting for his inheritance. He had been fighting for Ashley's commission. The anger I felt was not clean. It was complicated and heavy and mixed with something that ached because no matter what Ryan had done, he was still my son. And watching someone use a person you love as an instrument is its own particular kind of grief. "Find Diana Walsh," I said. "It's time." Marcus nodded. He had already located her. He told me she was still in Austin, still at the same diner near the hospital, still sending money home every week from a job that barely covered her rent. "She's not going to be easy to approach," he said. "She took the money because she needed it," I said. "That's not the same as believing what she did was right." I looked at him. "Give her a way out that protects her mother's treatment. She'll take it." Marcus studied me for a moment. "And if she doesn't, then we find another way," I said. "But she will." I was right about that. 3 days later, Diana Walsh called Marcus back within 2 hours of his first message. She had been waiting, I think, for someone to give her permission to tell the truth. The night before the board meeting, I drove to the old house on Claremont Drive alone. I did not plan it. I had intended to go back to the condo, pour a glass of water, and try to sleep for a few hours before what promised to be the most difficult morning I had faced in 20 years of running a company. But somewhere on the freeway, my hands made a decision my brain had not yet approved, and I found myself taking the Claremont exit without fully understanding why until I was already parked in the driveway with the engine off and the night quiet around me. Some places pull you back when you need them most. That house had always been one of those places. I let myself in with a key I still carried, on the same ring as my office keys, a habit I had never broken and never wanted to. The house smelled the way it always smelled, faintly, of the lemon wood polish Helen had ordered in bulk, from a catalog she had kept on the kitchen counter for as long as I could remember. And underneath that, something older and warmer that I could not name but recognized immediately as home. I turned on the lamp in the corner of the living room, the small one with the amber shade that Helen had picked out at an estate sale in the Heights neighborhood the first summer we lived there. She had been so pleased with it, carrying it out to the car wrapped in newspaper, telling me it made the room look like a painting. She had been right. It still did. I sat down on the floor, not in a chair, not on the couch, on the floor, with my back against the base of the bookshelf, the way I used to sit when Ryan was small, and we would spread his homework across the coffee table and work through it together. The floor felt right in a way that furniture did not. Less formal, closer to something real. The wooden box was on the second shelf between a collection of gardening books Helen had never stopped buying, and a clay pot Ethan had made in a community ceramics class when he was 17, and presented to her with the particular awkward pride of a teenage boy who has made something with his hands and does not know what to do with the feeling. Helen had placed it on that shelf the same afternoon he gave it to her, and had never moved it. I reached up and brought the box down to my lap. Helen had shown it to me once the year before she got sick. She had held it out with both hands and said in the matter-of-fact tone she used for things that were actually very important, "I'm going to leave some things in here for you. Don't open it unless you genuinely need to. You'll know when that is." She had said it the way people say things they hope you will never have to act on, but want you to have just in case. I opened the box. Inside, her wedding ring, which she had removed from her finger in the hospital and pressed into my hand, and which I had placed back in the box, because I could not bear to keep it anywhere. I would see it every day. 2 photographs, one of her and Ethan at his college graduation, her arm around his shoulders, her face lit up with the specific pride of a woman who has watched a boy become a man and knows she had something to do with it. One of the 3 of us, her Ryan and me, at a company picnic in the early years, before anything had become complicated. And an envelope. My name was written on it in her handwriting. The ink had faded slightly at the edges, the way ink does when paper has been sitting for years in a wooden box in a room that gets afternoon sun through the west window. I held it for a long time without opening it. My throat had already tightened to the point where swallowing was an effort. My hands were not entirely steady. I pressed them flat against the envelope and breathed the way Helen used to tell me to breathe when something was too large for the moment, slowly through the nose until the room stops narrowing. Then I opened it. Her handwriting was the same as it had always been, slightly slanted, very. Even the handwriting of a woman who had been an excellent student and had never lost the habit of writing carefully. The letter was 2 pages long. She had used the good stationery, the cream-colored paper, with the thin border that she saved for things that mattered. She wrote, "If you're reading this, the family is in some kind of trouble. I know you well enough to know you wouldn't open this otherwise. I want to say something about Ryan first, because I know that wherever the trouble is, he's probably somewhere near the center of it. Not because he's a bad person, he isn't, but because he has always believed that love is something you can borrow against, that the people who care about you will keep extending credit indefinitely. He learned that from watching you forgive him over and over, without ever letting him feel the full weight of what forgiveness actually costs. I'm not blaming you. I did the same thing. We both loved him in a way that protected him from himself, and I think we both knew it and kept doing it anyway because the alternative felt too much like giving up. About Ethan, he has never once asked you for anything he didn't earn first. I know you know that. I just want you to hear me say it. Here is what I am asking you. Don't choose between them based on guilt or obligation. Don't give Ethan what Ryan lost just to balance a ledger, and don't shut Ryan out to protect Ethan. Neither of those things is justice. But here is the harder part. The part I need you to actually hear. Let Ryan feel it. All of it. Don't catch him. Don't soften the landing. The kindest thing you can do for him at this point in his life is to let him hit the ground hard enough that he finally understands what solid ground feels like. He is still your son. He will always be your son. But a father's love is not the same thing as a father's rescue. I love you. I've always loved you. Take care of yourself, Robert. Not just the company, not just the boys. Yourself. Helen. I read it twice. The second time, my eyes were too full to see the words clearly, and I had to stop twice to press my fingers against them until I could continue. I was still sitting on the floor with the letter in my lap when I heard the front door open quietly behind me. I did not turn around. I knew his footsteps. Ethan crossed the living room and sat down on the floor beside me without a word of explanation or apology for coming uninvited. He simply sat the way he had sat in hospital waiting rooms, the way he had sat on a mountain ledge in the cold for 3 hours and 40 minutes, because sitting beside someone who needs company is not something Ethan ever had to be asked to do. He looked at the box in my lap, at the letter in my hand. He did not reach for it or ask to read it. After a while he said, "Is that from Mom?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. He nodded slowly. His jaw tightened for a moment, and I watched him press the emotion back down with the discipline of someone who has had years of practice doing exactly that in exactly this house. "She was always about 10 steps ahead of everyone," he said. 12, I said. "At least." Ethan made a sound that was almost a laugh, the kind that comes out when something is both funny and unbearable simultaneously, when grief and love have become so tangled together that they produce the same expression. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye for a moment, hard, then lowered it. "You don't have to cut Ryan out because of me," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's not what I want." I folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. "I know," I said, "but this isn't about what either of us wants anymore. It's about what Ryan chose." I looked at him. There's a difference between not cutting someone out and catching them every time they fall. Your mother understood that better than I did. She's been trying to tell me for years. Ethan looked at the clay pot on the shelf above us, the one he had made when he was 17, the one Helen had placed there the same afternoon, and never moved. His face did something complicated and private, and he let it because we were on the floor of the house where he had grown up, and there was no one here to perform anything for. We sat there for a long time without needing to fill it. Outside, Houston kept moving traffic on the boulevard, a block over a siren, somewhere in the distance, the ordinary sound of a city that does not stop for any one family's reckoning. Inside, the amber lamp threw its warm light across the floor, and the bookshelf, and the ceramic pot, and the two of us sitting on the hardwood like we had nowhere more important to be, which, for that hour, we didn't. I finally stood, placed the letter back in the box, and set the box carefully on the shelf beside the pot. "Get some sleep," I said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." Ethan pushed himself to his feet. He looked at me with Helen's eyes the same shape, the same quality of attention, the particular way she had of looking at you that made you feel both seen and steadied at the same time. "Whatever happens in that room," he said, "I'm not going anywhere." I placed my hand on his shoulder for a moment. Just a moment. "I know," I said. "That's always been the difference." I turned off the amber lamp, and we walked out together into the night, and behind us the house settled back into its quiet, the way old houses do when the people who love them have finally said what needed to be said. The board meeting was in 9 hours. Ryan had no idea what was waiting for him. Before I reveal what happened inside that boardroom, comment the word chair if you're still here, because what Ryan walked in carrying and what he walked out without is something I think about to this day. And a reminder, this story contains fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. If you'd prefer something different, this is a natural place to step away. For everyone staying the next few minutes are ones you won't forget. Ryan walked into the boardroom at 9 o'clock, wearing the suit I had bought him the day he was first promoted to VP, a charcoal gray 2-button that he had picked out himself at a Nordstrom on Post Oak Boulevard, and which I had paid for without hesitation, because I had believed at that moment that I was dressing my son for a future he was going to earn. I noticed the suit immediately. I do not know if he chose it deliberately or simply reached for it without thinking. Either way, the irony settled into my chest like a stone and stayed there. Ethan sat to my right. Richard Hale sat 2 chairs down his legal pad, open, his pen uncapped, his expression arranged into the careful neutrality of a man who has been in difficult rooms before and knows that the most useful thing he can do is watch and document everything. Ashley sat near the far end of the table. She had chosen a seat that placed 2 other people between herself and Ryan, a detail I noted and filed away. The 12 board members took their positions. 3 of them, Gerald Marsh, Frank Okafor, and Dennis Crawford, had arrived together and sat in a cluster near Ryan's end of the table. I had known all 3 for years. Seeing them position themselves that way told me everything I needed to know about the conversations Ashley had been having behind closed doors. Ryan opened a leather portfolio and removed a stack of documents. His hands were steady. Whatever else I might say about my son, he had prepared thoroughly, and he delivered his presentation with a composure that, under different circumstances, I might have admired. He started with Ethan. The fraudulent wire transfers were laid out in a printed summary, amount, dates, vendor name, approving authority. He presented them as established fact rather than allegation, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believes the evidence is unambiguous. Several board members leaned forward. Gerald Marsh made a note. Then Ryan moved to me. He produced a document he identified as a post-incident medical evaluation conducted following my hiking accident 14 months ago. According to the assessment I had demonstrated, measurable cognitive irregularities consistent with early-stage executive function decline, difficulty with complex decision-making, impaired risk assessment, susceptibility to emotional manipulation by close family members. The room went very quiet. I felt Ethan's hand tighten on the arm of his chair beside me. Richard Hale's pen stopped moving. Ashley, at the far end of the table, kept her eyes on Ryan with an expression of practiced concern that she had clearly rehearsed. Ryan looked directly at me when he delivered the conclusion. For the protection of the company, its employees, and its shareholders, he said, "I am formally requesting that the board vote to suspend my father from the chairmanship pending an independent medical review, and to remove Ethan Cole from the COO position pending a full financial audit." Gerald Marsh, Frank Okafor, and Dennis Crawford raised their hands in support within seconds of Ryan finishing. Ryan allowed himself a small, tight smile. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Ryan," I said. My voice came out completely level. "Which physician signed that evaluation?" He blinked. "It's from the hospital after the accident. It's in the header." "I can see the header," I said. "I'm asking about the physician, Dr. Harold Fenwick. Are you familiar with him?" Ryan's smile had faded entirely. "He treated you after the accident." "He did not." I nodded to Richard Hale, who pressed a key on the laptop in front of him. The wall screen behind me lit up with a letter on official Houston Methodist Hospital letterhead. "Dr. Harold Fenwick is an orthopedic specialist. He treated the ligament damage in my knee following the fall. He has no training in neurological or cognitive assessment, and he has never administered an evaluation of any kind relating to my cognitive function." I paused. I contacted the hospital's medical records office on Friday afternoon. They confirmed that no cognitive evaluation exists in my file. No such evaluation was ever ordered, conducted, or documented. The room temperature seemed to drop. Furthermore, Richard said, his voice measured and precise, a comparison of the signature on this document against Dr. Fenwick's publicly available published research, which carries his authenticated signature, reveals significant inconsistencies consistent with forgery. Under Texas law, that constitutes a third-degree felony. Presenting a forged document in a formal board proceeding to remove an officer of a privately held company also exposes the presenting party to civil liability for fraudulent misrepresentation and defamation per se. Ryan's face had gone the color of copy paper. He turned to Ashley. She did not look back at him. Her eyes were fixed on the wall screen with an expression that had gone completely unreadable. Not shock, not guilt. Just a flat, calculating stillness, the face of someone rapidly reassessing their position. The financial account used to pay for the fabrication of this document, Richard continued, traces to a limited liability company registered in Delaware. That company lists one officer. He looked down the table. Ashley Bennett. The three raised hands came down. Gerald Marsh pushed his chair back slightly from the table, as if creating physical distance from the situation. Frank Okafor set his pen down and did not pick it up again. Dennis Crawford pressed both palms flat against the table and looked at the ceiling, briefly the expression of a man calculating the legal exposure of his own position. Ryan stood at the end of the table with his leather portfolio open in front of him, and the documents he had spent weeks preparing had just become evidence against his wife, and the composure he had walked in with was coming apart at the seams, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small visible ways that a person falls apart when the ground disappears. A slight tremor in his jaw. A rapid blink, hands that gripped the edge of the portfolio too hard. "Ashley," he said. His voice came out stripped of everything except the question inside it. "Did you know about this?" She finally looked at him. "Don't," she said quietly. One word. The kind that means everything and nothing simultaneously. Ryan's grip on the portfolio tightened until his knuckles went white. I looked at my son across the length of that table, this man in the suit I had bought him, standing in the ruins of a plan he had believed in, beginning to understand that the architecture of that plan had never been entirely his, and I felt the grief of it move through me like something physical. But before anyone could speak again, the boardroom door opened, and Diana Walsh walked in. Diana Walsh looked smaller than I remembered. She had lost weight since leaving Bennett Industrial, not the healthy kind, but the kind that comes from months of stress and irregular meals, and too many nights lying awake running numbers that never quite add up. She wore a plain navy blazer over a white blouse, and her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had made an effort this morning to look like someone who had their life under control. Her hands folded in front of her as she entered were trembling visibly. The man beside her was not trembling at all. He was perhaps 50 heavyset with the unhurried posture of someone who has spent decades walking into difficult rooms and emerging intact. He carried a briefcase and a recorder the size of a deck of cards. "My name is Gerald Foote," he said, addressing the table. "I represent Diana Walsh. 3 days ago, my client signed a cooperation agreement with the Harris County District Attorney's Office. In exchange for significantly reduced charges, she has agreed to provide full testimony and surrender all recordings and documentation in her possession relevant to the matters currently before this board." The room had gone so quiet I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Ashley's chin came up. Her eyes moved to Diana with an expression that was trying very hard to be contemptuous and was not quite succeeding. Underneath the contempt was something that looked disturbingly like fear. Ryan had not moved. He was still standing at the far end of the table, with his portfolio in his hands, watching Diana the way a person watches something they cannot fully process yet, because the implications are arriving faster than understanding can keep up with them. Diana looked at me first. Her eyes were red at the rims she had been crying recently, or was very close to it, and when she found my face across the length of that table, something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly. More like the particular release that comes when a person has been carrying something alone for too long and has finally found the place to set it down. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett," she said. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard, holding herself together by main force. "I'm so sorry. I told myself nobody would really get hurt. I know that doesn't—" She stopped, pulled a breath. "I know that doesn't make it right." "Ms. Walsh." Gerald Foote touched her arm briefly. "Your statement." Diana straightened. When she spoke again, her voice had steadied into something that cost her visible effort to maintain. She told them everything. Ryan had approached her at the diner near her apartment on the evening of October 8th. He had brought cash enough to cover 4 months of her mother's treatment. He had asked her to clone Ethan's access badge, swap the computer in his office, and generate 3 wire transfers from the replacement machine. She had done all 3 over the following 3 days. She had used the clone badge to enter Ethan's office at 8:01 on the evening of October 14th, after Ethan had already left the building, though she had not known about the camera timestamp discrepancy at the time. The room was absolutely still. Gerald Marsh had stopped breathing audibly. Dennis Crawford had both hands flat on the table. Frank Okafor was looking at the ceiling again, and this time he did not bring his gaze back down. Ryan's portfolio slipped in his grip. He caught it before it fell, but only just. "The recordings," Gerald Foote said, and placed the device on the table. He pressed play. Ashley's voice filled the boardroom with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation, no possibility of context that might soften what was being said. "Just make sure everything traces back to Ethan. Once the board removes him and the old man Ryan takes over. After that, nobody cares who you are. You disappear, I disappear, and we both walk away with exactly what we came for." The recording ended. Gerald Foote said, "For the record, under Texas Penal Code, Section 16.02, only one party to a private conversation is required to consent to its recording. My client was a direct participant in that conversation. The recording is fully and unambiguously legal, and it is admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings." 3 seconds of silence. Then Ryan turned to look at his wife. "I have seen my son angry. I have seen him embarrassed, defensive, deflated. I have seen him at his worst and at his best and at every gradation between. But I had never seen him look the way he looked at Ashley in that moment, like a man staring at a stranger, wearing the face of someone he thought he knew, trying to reconcile the voice on that recording, with 16 years of marriage and failing completely. "Say something," he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Ashley, say something." She met his eyes. Her chin was still up. Her composure was still technically intact, but it had become the brittle kind, the kind that holds not because of strength, but because breaking would require admitting something she was not yet prepared to admit in a room full of witnesses. "Whatever I did," she said, her voice very controlled, very even, "I did for us." Ryan's face crumpled. Not slowly all at once like a structure whose load-bearing wall has just been removed. His eyes filled, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, his shoulders caving forward, and for one terrible moment, he looked exactly like the 8-year-old boy I remembered from the warehouse floor, the one who had stood with his fists clenched and his lip trembling because he thought he had been left behind. Except this time, there was no version of events where I could crouch down and tell him he was wrong. He had not been left behind. He had walked away. "I did it for us," Ashley said again, as if repetition might make it land differently. "There is no us in that contract," Ryan said. His voice cracked down the middle on the last word. "There's only you." Richard Hale stood. In light of the evidence presented, he said, "I am advising this board that Bennett Industrial Systems, as a privately held company, has full legal authority to act on these findings immediately. I am further advising that the board refer the matters of wire fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1343 access device fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1029, and forgery under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21 to the appropriate authorities for criminal review." He looked at Gerald Marsh, Frank Okafor, and Dennis Crawford. "I am also advising the 3 members who entered into written agreements with Mrs. Bennett regarding preferential share purchases to consult their own legal counsel before this meeting concludes. Those agreements are now part of the evidentiary record." All 3 men looked for the first time that morning, genuinely frightened. Ashley's composure finally showed its first real crack, a tightening around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips, the involuntary expression of a person who has just understood that the exit they had planned is no longer available. She reached for her phone under the table. Richard Hale said quietly but very clearly, "I would strongly recommend against contacting anyone outside this room until the board has concluded its business, Mrs. Bennett." She set the phone down. The vote when it came was unanimous. The vote had been unanimous, but the meeting was not over. Marcus Reed, who had been sitting against the wall behind me throughout the entire proceeding, not at the table because he was not a board member, but close enough to hand documents to Richard Hale, as needed, stood up and walked to the presentation laptop without being asked. He pressed a key. The wall screen, which had shown the hospital letter and its damning comparison of signatures, went dark for a moment. Then it filled with a new document. It was 11 pages long. The header read, "Confidential Letter of Intent, Pinnacle Manufacturing Group and Ashley R. Bennett executed. September 19th, 2024. September 19th, 15 days before the anniversary ceremony." Ryan looked at the screen. His eyes moved across the header and stopped at the date. I watched him do the arithmetic, watch the specific expression that crosses a person's face when a number confirms something they had been trying not to believe. "What is this?" he asked. His voice had the quality of something already broken, asking to be broken again just to be certain. Marcus answered without inflection, the way he always delivered difficult information, as fact, not as theater. "A letter of intent between your wife and Pinnacle Manufacturing Group, Bennett Industrial's primary competitor in the Gulf Coast market. It was signed 6 weeks before the board meeting you called this morning." Marcus advanced the slide. "The terms outline a phased acquisition of Bennett Industrial's 2 Gulf Coast manufacturing facilities, the Pasadena plant and the Galveston operation, at a combined price representing approximately 40% below current market valuation." Ryan pressed both hands flat on the table. His arms were shaking. "That's over 400 jobs," Ethan said quietly from beside me. He was not performing outrage. His voice carried the specific weight of a man who knows the names of the people those jobs belong to, who has stood on those factory floors and shaken those hands and learned those names over years of showing up. 437, Marcus said, "at the Pasadena facility alone." Ryan turned to Ashley. She was still in her chair at the far end of the table, and she had not moved since Richard Hale had advised her against using her phone, but something in her posture had shifted. The calculated stillness she had maintained all morning was beginning to cost her more than she could sustain, and the effort of it showed in the set of her jaw and the way her hands had closed into fists on top of the table. "You were going to sell them," Ryan said. Not a question. A statement arriving slowly like something heavy falling through water. "The facilities would have been underperforming under any scenario where Ethan remained in a leadership role," Ashley said. Her voice was still controlled, but the smoothness had gone out of it. It was the controlled tone of someone managing, rather than composing. "I was protecting our future." "There are 437 people working in those buildings," Ryan said. His voice cracked on the number. "People with families, people who have worked for this company for 20 years. He pushed himself away from the table slightly as if he needed air. "My father built this company for 20 years. You were going to sell it to the people trying to put him out of business. I was going to make sure we didn't walk away with nothing when Ethan inevitably pushed you out." "Ethan wasn't pushing me out." Ryan's voice rose for the first time that morning, not the controlled projection he had used during his presentation, but something raw and unmanaged that came up from somewhere much deeper. "I was doing that to myself. You just helped me do it faster." Ashley's composure broke. Not dramatically, she did not cry, she did not raise her voice. But her face underwent a rearrangement that I had never seen on it before, a collapsing of the careful architecture she had maintained for as long as I had known her, replaced by something that might, in a different room in a different life, have been genuine anguish, or might simply have been the expression of a person watching their plan fail and feeling the loss of the plan rather than anything deeper. I was not sure even then which one it was. Marcus advanced the slides again. Page 7. He said, outlines the compensation structure for Mrs. Bennett personally. A transaction fee of $840,000 payable upon closing, plus an advisory board seat at Pinnacle for a term of 3 years. He let that number sit in the room for a moment. Ryan Bennett's name does not appear anywhere in this document. Not as a signatory, not as a beneficiary, not as a party to the arrangement in any capacity. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard all morning. Ryan picked up the document with both hands, the printed copy Marcus had placed in front of him, and read page 7 himself. I could see his eyes moving down the page. I could see the exact moment he found the compensation clause because his jaw tightened to the point where the muscle in his cheek jumped and his breathing changed. He set the document down very carefully. The care he took doing it was almost worse than if he had thrown it. "You were never going to share any of this with me," he said. Ashley said nothing. For the first time all morning, she had nothing to say. "You used me," Ryan said. His voice had gone quiet again, the quietness on the other side of the rise, the kind that comes after the anger and is somehow heavier. "You needed my name on the chairmanship so you could activate the letter of intent. That's all you needed from me. My title, my signature." He pressed 2 fingers to his forehead, his elbow on the table, and stared at the wood grain for a long moment. "The whole time I thought I was protecting my inheritance. I was protecting your commission." Richard Hale stood again. "For the record," he said, "the board is advised that the trade secret theft involved in providing Pinnacle Manufacturing with proprietary Bennett, industrial, financial, and operational data violates the Defend Trade Secrets Act, 18 United States Code, Section 1836. This is a federal offense carrying civil and criminal penalties. The letter of intent itself, being predicated on information obtained through theft, is unenforceable as a matter of contract law." He looked at the 3 shareholders who had entered into written agreements with Ashley. The written agreements between Mrs. Bennett and certain board members offering preferential share purchase arrangements in a privately held company in exchange for votes in a formal governance proceeding constitute a textbook example of corporate vote buying. Those agreements are void, and the individuals who sign them have potential exposure for breach of fiduciary duty. He paused. "As I said earlier, I strongly recommend independent legal counsel before this meeting concludes." Gerald Marsh stood up abruptly and left the room without speaking to anyone. Frank Okafor followed 30 seconds later. Dennis Crawford remained in his seat but took out his phone and was already dialing before Richard had finished speaking. I stood. The room turned toward me, and I looked at my son. This man in the suit I had bought him, sitting in the wreckage of everything he had built and destroyed over the past 3 weeks, surrounded by documents that told the story of choices he had made and choices that had been made for him, and I felt the full weight of every year between the day he was born and this morning settle across my shoulders all at once. I thought about Helen's letter. Let him feel it. Don't catch him. The kindest thing you can do is let him hit the ground hard enough that he finally understands what solid ground feels like. "Ryan," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red but dry. He had moved past the place where tears were available and into the country beyond it, the flat, exhausted landscape that comes after everything has already happened. "The thing that hurts me most," I said, "is not that you wanted the chair. I understand wanting it. I understand feeling entitled to something you grew up believing was yours." I stopped. Let that much land. "What I cannot understand, what I will be sitting with for a long time, is that you were willing to destroy the livelihoods of 900 people and the reputation of a man who has given this company everything he had because you believed that entitlement was the same thing as earning." Ryan's chin dropped to his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out scraped and raw, like they had been pulled up from somewhere that had not been accessed in a very long time. I looked at him for a long moment. "Are you sorry for what you did?" I asked. "Or are you sorry that it didn't work?" He lifted his head. His mouth opened, and then for the first time in the entire morning, for the first time perhaps, in longer than that, Ryan Bennett had no answer ready. Not a prepared one, not a borrowed one, not one that Ashley had helped him construct. Just the truth of not knowing. Which was, I thought, the most honest thing I had seen from him in years. "I won't save you from what comes next," I said. "But if the day comes when you can answer that question honestly, I will listen." I sat down. The room was very quiet. Ashley picked up her bag from the floor beside her chair, stood smoothed her jacket with both hands, and walked toward the door with the precise, measured steps of a woman who is performing composure for an audience she no longer controls. She had a plan for this too. She always had a plan. But this time, the plan was already running out of road. Ashley moved fast. I will give her that even now. Whatever else she was not slow. She was out of the boardroom and into the elevator before the door had fully closed behind her, and by the time the elevator reached the lobby, she was already on the phone. Marcus told me later that she made 4 calls in the 11 minutes between leaving the 12th floor and reaching the parking garage. The first was to a criminal defense attorney, whose name I recognized from the local news coverage of a high-profile fraud case 2 years prior. The second was to her personal banker. The third and fourth were to numbers Marcus's team was still working to identify. She was building her exit before the meeting had formally adjourned. I did not follow her out. I sat at the head of that table and watched the room empty board members filing out in clusters, speaking quietly to each other. Dennis Crawford, still on his phone, Gerald Marsh gone without a word to anyone. Richard Hale remained organizing documents with the methodical patience of a man who understands that the work does not stop when the drama does. Ethan stayed too leaning forward with his elbows on the table, looking at the wood grain in front of him with the expression of someone who has just survived something and has not yet fully processed the fact of their survival. Marcus came to stand beside me. "She's going to run," he said, not a question. "I know. We anticipated it." He placed his phone on the table in front of me. On the screen was an email thread between Richard Hale and the chambers of Judge Patricia Owens of the Harris County District Court, a temporary restraining order application filed at 11:47 that morning, while the board meeting was still in session. The TRO targeted all financial accounts held jointly or solely by Ashley Bennett, pending civil proceedings related to trade secret theft and fraudulent misrepresentation. Judge Owens had signed it at 12:32. The bank was notified at 12:35, Marcus said. "The accounts are frozen." I looked at the timestamp. Ashley had left the boardroom at approximately 11:58. She had called her personal banker from the elevator. By the time that call connected, the accounts were 7 minutes away from being locked. "And the other matter?" I asked. Marcus nodded. Gerald Foote, Diana's attorney, submitted the cooperation statement and the recordings to the Harris County DA's office 3 days ago when Diana signed the agreement. The DA's team has been reviewing the evidence since then. Richard coordinated with them this morning. He checked his watch. The arrest warrant for wire fraud, trade secret theft, and forgery was signed by a federal magistrate judge at 1:15 this afternoon. He said it so quietly, so without ceremony, that it took me a moment to absorb the full weight of what he had just told me. My daughter-in-law, the woman Ryan had married 16 years ago, the woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and accepted my Christmas gifts and called me Robert with the particular tone that always made the name sound like a door she was keeping slightly ajar, was going to be arrested. I had known this was coming. I had helped make it happen. And yet, the knowing and the happening are never quite the same thing. "Where is she?" I asked. "George Bush Intercontinental, Terminal E. Her flight to Lisbon boards at 6:55 tomorrow morning. She booked it from her phone in the parking garage at 12:03. Marcus paused. "One-way ticket." I thought about what Marcus had told me weeks earlier about the contents of Ashley's preparation, the rental agreement for a furnished apartment in Lisbon's Chiado, neighborhood the second phone, the account at a Portuguese bank that had been opened 6 months ago under her maiden name. She had not decided to run this morning. She had been ready to run for half a year. She checked in online from the parking garage, Marcus continued. Her bag will be in Terminal E security by 5:45 tomorrow morning. He looked at me steadily. Federal agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will be waiting at the security checkpoint. The arrest warrant covers federal charges, which means the Bureau has jurisdiction. I stood and walked to the window. Below Houston moved through its afternoon, in the ordinary way that cities move traffic on the feeder roads. A delivery truck double-parked outside the building, across the street, 2 people eating lunch on a bench in the small plaza below. The world did not know what had happened in the room behind me. It would not care particularly once it did. These things happen in office buildings every day in every city in this country, and the city absorbs them and keeps moving. I thought about Ryan. He had left the boardroom 20 minutes after Ashley, and he had not said another word to me before going. He had simply picked up the leather portfolio, the one with the documents that had been turned against him, tucked it under his arm, and walked out with his eyes focused on the middle distance, the way people walk when they are holding themselves together by concentrating very hard on putting one foot in front of the other. I had let him go. Every instinct I had as a father had screamed at me to follow him, to catch him, before he reached the elevator, to say something that would soften the next 6 months of his life. Helen's letter had been in my jacket pocket all morning, and I had pressed my hand against it twice during the meeting, without being aware I was doing it. And each time I had heard her voice in the back of my mind, patient and clear and more honest than I was always capable of being with myself. "Let him feel it. Don't catch him. So I had stayed in my chair and watched my son walk out of the room and into the consequences of his own choices, and I had kept my hands flat on the table and my face arranged into something that did not betray the fact that it was one of the hardest things I had ever done. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full shape of what Ryan lost. His position at Bennett Industrial was terminated effective immediately pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into his role in the fraudulent transactions and the forged medical assessment. Under Texas law, the charges against him wire fraud under federal statute and breach of fiduciary duty under state corporate law carried potential consequences that his own attorney would need to navigate. I did not hire that attorney for him. I did not make any calls on his behalf. I paid none of the legal fees. His and Ashley's joint accounts remained frozen, pending the civil proceedings. The house in River Oaks, the one they had purchased with a mortgage that had required Ryan's Bennett Industrial salary to service, became unaffordable within 60 days of his termination. He moved out in December. The bank began foreclosure proceedings in January. Ashley was taken into federal custody at George Bush Intercontinental Airport at 5:51 in the morning on October 29th. Marcus sent me a text when it happened. 3 words done. She's in custody. I read it sitting at the kitchen table in the old house on Claremont Drive, where I had slept that night, because I had not been able to make myself go back to the condo. I put the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the window above the sink, the one that looks out over the backyard where Helen used to grow tomatoes every summer, insisting every year that this would be the year she got the pH of the soil right, and I sat there for a long time without moving. The charges against Ashley were substantial: wire fraud, trade secret theft under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, forgery. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea at arraignment which surprised no one. The civil case, Bennett Industrial versus Ashley Bennett and Pinnacle Manufacturing Group, was filed the following week by Richard Hale. Pinnacle's general counsel issued a statement distancing the company from Ashley's actions and characterizing her as a rogue actor. Their letter of intent, built on stolen proprietary information, was void under federal law, and they knew it. Diana Walsh, having honored her cooperation agreement fully and completely, received a deferred prosecution agreement from the Harris County DA's office. No jail time, no criminal record, provided she completed 2 years of supervised community service. I arranged through Richard Hale, and without Diana's knowledge, for a donation to be made to the University of Texas Medical Center's Oncology Patient Assistance Fund, enough to cover the remainder of her mother's treatment costs. I did not attach my name to it. Some debts are settled quietly. That night, October 29th, the morning becoming afternoon and then evening, as I sat in various rooms of the old house doing very little except existing inside the strange depleted calm that follows a long and terrible thing finally being over, I thought about Ryan constantly. Not with anger. The anger had burned through faster than I expected, leaving behind something softer and more complicated. A grief that was not quite grief. A love that was not quite peace. The particular emotional condition of a parent who has done the right thing and cannot fully feel that it was right because the right thing required watching their child suffer. I did not call him. He needed to feel the ground. Helen had been very clear about that. But 6 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in April, Ethan knocked on my office door and opened it without waiting for an answer, which he only ever did when something important was happening. "There's someone outside," he said. "He says he's not here to ask for anything." He stepped back from the doorway, and I looked up from my desk and I saw my son standing in the hallway, thinner than I remembered, wearing a shirt I did not recognize, holding nothing in his hands. He was thinner than I remembered, not dramatically, not the kind of thin that makes people ask questions, but the kind that accumulates quietly over months of sleeping badly and eating whatever is available rather than whatever is preferred, the kind that shows up first in the jaw and the collar and the way a person carries their shoulders. Ryan had always had the posture of a man who knew he was somebody's son. Standing in my hallway doorway in April, he had the posture of a man who was still figuring out whose. He was wearing a blue chambray work shirt, the kind with the snap buttons and the chest pocket slightly faded at the elbows. I had never seen it before. Whatever closet it had come from, it was not the one in River Oaks. He was not carrying anything except a small paper bag folded at the top. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice came out rougher than it used to, Not damaged exactly, but worked in the way voices get when a person has been talking less and doing more. "Ryan," I said, "come in." He crossed the office and sat down in the chair across from my desk, without being invited, not with the aggressive entitlement he had brought into this room 6 months ago, but with the simple exhaustion of someone who has been standing for a very long time and is relieved to sit. He set the paper bag on the edge of my desk and looked at it for a moment before looking at me. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for about 3 months, he said. "I wrote it down a few times, threw it away." He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. Everything I came up with sounded like I was still trying to manage the situation, like I was still performing something. He met my eyes. "I don't want to do that anymore." "All right," I said. "Then don't." He nodded, took a breath. "I've been working at a place called Hartwell Machine and Fabrication. It's in Stafford, about 25 minutes south of here, in an industrial park off Murphy Road. Small operation, 12 employees. They do custom metal fabrication, mostly for the oil and gas sector." He glanced down at his hands. There were faint calluses forming at the base of his fingers, the kind that take months to develop. "I applied under my middle name, Robert James Bennett. I used James. Didn't mention the last name." "Did it work?" The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "For about 2 weeks. Then the owner, a guy named Carl, pulled me aside and said, 'I know who you are. I read about it online. I don't care as long as you show up and do the work.'" Ryan looked at his hands again. "So I showed up, and I did the work." He reached over and unfolded the top of the paper bag. He reached inside and placed something on my desk between us. It was the name card. The original one, white cardstock, engraved lettering, slightly worn at the edges, from however many months Ryan had been carrying it, or keeping it somewhere it could be found and held. Ryan Bennett, son of the founder. Sarah had removed it from the chair at the anniversary ceremony. I had not known where it had gone afterward. "I took it," Ryan said. "That night after I went back to the ballroom after everyone had left, and I took it off the table where Sarah had set it. I told myself I was taking back what was mine." He looked at the card on my desk. "I've been keeping it in the drawer next to my bed for 6 months. I looked at it almost every morning." He lifted his eyes to mine. "I finally figured out what it actually was." "What was it?" I asked. "Evidence," he said, "that I had confused having your name with deserving your trust." The office was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the ordinary sounds of the building, the elevator somewhere below, a phone ringing 2 offices down, the HVAC cycling on with the low hum that I had long ago stopped noticing. "There's a man at Hartwell," Ryan continued. "His name is Tom Briggs. He's 50 years old. He's been working in fabrication shops since he was 19. He's got a daughter at Sam Houston State and a truck with 240,000 miles on it that he keeps running himself, because he knows every system in it personally." Ryan's voice had gone quieter, steadier the way it goes, when a person is talking about something they have thought about carefully, rather than something they are improvising. "On my 3rd day, I seized a milling machine. Incorrect feed rate my fault entirely. The kind of mistake that costs money and time and makes everyone around you aware of exactly how much you don't know." He stopped for a moment. "Tom didn't call me out in front of the crew. He waited until the afternoon break. Then he came over, sat down on the floor next to the machine with me, and spent 45 minutes showing me what I'd done wrong and how to do it right. No agenda, no performance review, no implication that I owed him anything for the time he was spending." Ryan's jaw tightened briefly, and when he continued, his voice was slightly thicker. "I've had managers and mentors and executive coaches and people paid specifically to develop my professional skills. Nobody ever did what Tom did that afternoon without wanting something in return." He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling briefly, the movement of a man holding something back that wants very much to come forward. "I thought about Ethan," he said. "I thought about how many times he must have done that, shown up, fixed things, sat on the floor with the problem. And I had never once noticed because I was too busy assuming it was my name on the building that made me important." He looked at me directly. "It's not, is it, the name? It was never the name." "No," I said. "It wasn't." Ryan nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he already knew, but needed to hear from outside himself. "I want to apologize to you," he said. "Not as a strategy, not as a way back into the company, or back into your good graces, or back into anything. I want to say it because it's true, and because I should have said it a long time ago for things that happened long before October." He looked at me steadily. I let you down for years before I ever walked into that boardroom. I just made it impossible to ignore in October. My throat tightened. I kept my face even. You did, I said. I know. He did not flinch. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. For the ceremony, for the years before the ceremony, for choosing easy over present so many times that I stopped noticing I was choosing. He exhaled a long, unsteady breath that he did not try to make sound steady. I'm sorry for what I did to Ethan. That one, I don't know if I have the right to ask for his forgiveness. I don't know if he'd want to hear from me. I looked at my son for a long moment. Have you tried? I asked. No. His voice was honest about it without the defensive scaffolding he would have built around the admission 6 months ago. I didn't know if I should reach out directly or if that would make things worse. I didn't want to make it about what I needed. He paused. That's new for me, not making things about what I need. It is, I said. Something flickered across his face, not quite hurt, not quite humor. A complicated middle thing that told me he understood both the honesty and the gentleness in what I had said, and that he was not going to argue with either. Ethan asked about you, I said. 3 weeks ago, he asked how you were doing. Ryan blinked. Whatever he had expected me to say, it was not that. His eyes went bright at the corners, not tears yet, but the territory just before them. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth for a moment, collecting himself. That's, he started, stopped. He doesn't owe me that. No, I agreed. He doesn't, but that's who he is. Ryan looked at the name card on my desk. Then he looked at me. I'm not asking to come back to the company, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know I haven't earned that, and I don't know if I ever will. He stopped. His voice had gone to the edge of something, and he pulled it back. I wanted to come and tell you that I understand now, what you built, what it actually means to build something, what it costs. He touched the edge of the name card with one finger lightly, the way you touch something you are not sure you have the right to touch. Tom Briggs has been building things his whole life. He doesn't have a name on any building, but every person who has ever worked next to him knows exactly what he's worth. I reached across the desk and moved the name card to the side. Then I reached down and pulled out the chair beside my desk. Not the visitor's chair across from me, but the one beside me, the secondary chair that had been in this office for 15 years and had held lawyers and partners and employees I trusted. I set it in front of him. Sit down, I said. This time start with the truth, all of it, from the beginning. Ryan looked at the chair. His chin trembled once, a brief involuntary movement that he did not try to suppress. His eyes had filled completely, and he let them without pressing them away or looking at the ceiling or doing any of the things people do when they are trying to manage how their grief appears. He sat down, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to count, my son was in a room with me, and neither of us was pretending. We talked for 2 hours. I did not forgive him that afternoon, not because I had decided against it, but because forgiveness is not something that happens in a single room on a single afternoon. It is a direction you choose and then walk in for a long time before you understand that you have arrived somewhere. What happened in that office on a Tuesday in April was not the arrival. It was the first step taken in the right direction by a man who was finally willing to walk without knowing in advance where he was going to end up. When Ryan stood to leave, I walked him to the door. In the hallway, he stopped and turned back. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Ethan. He said the name carefully, like something he was still learning how to carry. Do you think he'd be willing to have a conversation? Not now. Not this week. When he's ready, if he ever is. He met my eyes. I want to apologize to him, not to get anything back, just because it's the right thing and he deserves to hear it. I looked at my son in the hallway of the company his grandfather's generation never knew would exist, wearing a shirt I did not recognize, standing straighter than he had an hour ago. I'll ask him, I said. Ryan nodded. His eyes were still wet and he did not wipe them. Thank you, he said, for not giving up. I did not tell him that there had been evenings when I had come very close, that there had been nights in the old house where I had sat in Helen's chair and held her letter and wondered whether patience was wisdom, or simply another word for the particular stubbornness of people who love too hard to stop. I just said, go back to work. Tom Briggs is expecting you. Ryan almost smiled. It was the best almost smile I had seen on his face in years, unpolished, unmanaged real. He turned and walked toward the elevator, and I stood in the doorway and watched him go, and I thought about Helen writing that letter on cream-colored paper with careful handwriting, asking me to let him feel it, to not catch him, to trust that the ground would teach him what I could not. She had been right. She was always right. 1 year. That is how long it takes for a company to remember what it is after a season of nearly forgetting. That is how long it takes for a son to only begin the work of becoming someone his father can recognize again. That is how long it took me to understand that Helen's letter had not been instructions for a single crisis. It had been a map for the rest of my life. The annual shareholders meeting of Bennett Industrial Systems took place on a Friday morning in October, in the same building where 12 months earlier I had stood beside 2 empty chairs and made a decision that changed everything. There were no cameras this time, no live stream, no crystal ballroom, no 400 guests, no screens cycling through 20 years of photographs. Just the conference room on the 12th floor, 18 board members and senior staff, and the ordinary business of a company that had survived something and was still standing. Ethan presented the operational results first. He stood at the head of the table, in the same kind of clothes he always wore to meetings, a pressed button-down, dark slacks, no tie, and walked the board through 12 months of numbers with the quiet authority of someone who has earned every figure he is citing. Revenue up 14%. Production efficiency at the Pasadena facility improved by 22%, following the implementation of a redesigned workflow that Ethan's engineering team had developed in-house. The Galveston operation had added 63 new positions in the third quarter. The company's credit rating had been upgraded in September. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment, in the way that rooms go quiet when the numbers have done all the necessary talking. Richard Hale cleared his throat. The board has completed its independent performance review of Ethan Cole as acting chief operating officer. He said, as outlined in the terms of his appointment 12 months ago. The review assessed operational outcomes, leadership effectiveness, employee retention, and financial stewardship. He looked around the table. The board's recommendation is unanimous. Ethan Cole is hereby confirmed as Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Industrial Systems, effective immediately. Applause not the theatrical kind, but the real kind, the kind that comes from people who have watched someone work and are genuinely glad to say so. Carol Simmons was clapping with both hands and smiling in the way she almost never smiled in professional settings. 2 of the senior engineers in the back row were on their feet. Ethan stood at the head of the table and absorbed it with the expression he always had when attention landed on him, unexpectedly slightly uncomfortable, deeply grateful, and already thinking about something else. "Thank you," he said when the room had settled. "I want to say something before we move on." He looked at me. "The board has discussed amending my compensation structure to include an equity stake in the company," he said. "I've asked them not to." The room shifted. Several faces registered surprise. "What I'd like to propose instead," Ethan continued, "is the establishment of a discretionary employee trust, a legal structure under which company equity is allocated gradually to long-term employees based on tenure and contribution, rather than concentrated in any individual. Starting with the people who were here before I was. Starting with the people who stayed when things were hard." He paused. "Tom Briggs has been in this industry for 30 years. He doesn't work for Bennett Industrial, but the men like him, who do the ones who show up every morning and build things for other people without their names on anything they deserve to own a piece of what they've helped create." He looked at Richard Hale. "I'd like to start the legal framework this quarter, if the board is willing." Richard Hale was already writing. 3 board members spoke in favor immediately. The vote, when it came, was unanimous for the second time in 12 months. But this time, the unanimity felt different. It felt like agreement rather than conclusion. It felt like a room of people choosing the same thing because they genuinely believed in it. After the formal meeting concluded, I walked through the building. I did this sometimes, not with any particular destination, just moving through the floors and the hallways and the production areas the way you move through a house you have lived in, long enough that the walking itself is a kind of conversation. I knew where the floors creaked. I knew which elevator was slow. I knew the smell of the coffee machine on the 8th floor that was slightly different from all the others because someone had once put hazelnut pods in it by accident and the machine had never fully recovered. I took the service stairs down to the ground-level fabrication annex, A newer addition to the building, connected to the main structure by a covered walkway that rattled slightly when the wind came off the gulf. Through the window in the door, I could see the floor. Ryan was there. He was crouched beside a metal press at the far end of the room, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, a wrench in his right hand. Beside him, sitting on an overturned crate with the relaxed posture of someone who has sat on overturned crates his entire working life, was Tom Briggs. Tom was talking. I could not hear what he was saying through the door, but I could see his hands moving the specific demonstrative gestures of a man explaining a mechanical principle, tracing the path of something with his index finger in the air between them. Ryan was watching Tom's hands with the concentrated attention of a person who is genuinely trying to understand, rather than merely appear to nodding, occasionally asking something that made Tom pause and then nod, and then continue. Ryan's hands were dirty. There was a streak of grease along his left forearm that he had not bothered to wipe. His hair needed cutting. He looked like someone who had been working since early morning and had several more hours to go and was not thinking about either of those facts. He did not know I was watching. I stood at that door for perhaps 2 minutes, long enough for Tom to finish his explanation and hand Ryan a tool and watch while Ryan applied what he had just been told, correcting him once with a hand on his wrist, demonstrating the correct angle, then stepping back when Ryan got it right. Long enough to see my son smile, not the performed, managed smile of the boardroom, not the defensive smile of a man who is trying to control how he is perceived, but the small, private, satisfied smile of a person who has just understood how something works and is pleased about it for no reason except the understanding itself. Ethan appeared at my shoulder. I had not heard him come down the stairs, but that was Ethan. He had always moved through spaces without announcing himself, arriving where he was needed, before anyone had formally identified the need. He looked through the door at Ryan and Tom. "How long has he been down here?" I asked. "Since 7 this morning," Ethan said. He asked Carl, the owner at Hartwell, for a day off to come in and volunteer. He wanted to help with the press recalibration. He paused. I said yes before Carl finished the sentence. I looked at Ethan. "You've been talking to him," I said. It was not a question. "Some?" Ethan's voice was careful, measured, not guarded, but honest about the fact that there was more ground to cover than had been covered. "We had coffee twice. It was—" He stopped, found the right word. "It was a beginning." "That's enough," I said. "For now," Ethan agreed. Through the door, Ryan had stood up from his crouch. He said something to Tom that made the older man laugh, a real laugh, the kind that requires no performance, the kind that comes from two people who have spent enough time together for genuine things to become possible between them. Tom clapped Ryan once on the shoulder with the comfortable authority of a man who has decided someone is all right, and Ryan absorbed it with a steadiness that I had not seen in him a year ago. He was all right, not fixed, not redeemed, not arrived at any destination I could point to and say that is the place where everything became good again. But standing and working and learning and earning the respect of a 50-year-old machinist who had no reason to offer it except that Ryan had shown up every day and done the work without complaint. Ethan asked quietly, "Do you think he'll make it?" I looked at my son through the door for a long moment at his dirty hands and his rolled sleeves, and the careful attention he was giving to the machine in front of him. "I think," I said slowly, "that for the first time in his life, he's asking the right questions instead of assuming he already has the answers." Ethan considered that. Then he said, "Mom would have liked seeing this." My chest tightened in the specific way it tightens when something true is said about someone you miss. "She would have cried through the whole thing," I said, and then insisted she wasn't crying. Ethan made the sound that was half laugh and half something that hurt, the same sound he had made in the ballroom a year ago when I mentioned Helen, and which I suspected he would continue to make for the rest of his life whenever she came up unexpectedly, which meant I intended to mention her as often as I reasonably could. We stood there together for another minute, not saying anything that needed to be said. Then I turned away from the door and walked back toward the main building, and Ethan fell into step beside me, the way he always did. Not behind, not ahead, just beside. I thought about 2 chairs, the ones that were still in the corner of the 12th floor conference room, where I had placed them after the anniversary ceremony. White cards removed bare wood slightly apart from each other, the way things are when they have been waiting a long time without knowing what they are waiting for. I had been asked more than once in the past year why I kept them there, by board members, by staff, by a journalist who had done a follow-up piece on the anniversary ceremony, and wanted to know if the chairs were some kind of symbolic statement. I had told the journalist the same thing I told everyone else who asked. A chair can be given by blood, by money, or by title. You can have your name engraved on it and your photograph taken in it and your inheritance built around it. You can believe from the time you are 12 years old that it belongs to you and spend the next 3 decades waiting for someone to hand it over. But to actually deserve to sit in it, to earn the right to that particular weight, that particular responsibility, that particular view of the people who are counting on you, a person has to do something that cannot be purchased or inherited or awarded at a ceremony. They have to show up. Not once, not at the moments that are convenient or flattering or well lit, but in the ordinary moments, the difficult ones, the ones where no camera is rolling and no audience is watching, and the only witness is the work itself and the people standing beside you in it. Ethan had been doing that his whole life. Ryan was learning. I was still learning too, if I was honest about it. Still learning how to be a father to a son I had spent too long trying to protect from the very lessons that were now finally making him into someone I recognized. Still learning how to carry Helen's absence without leaning on it so heavily that it became an excuse for standing still. The elevator doors opened on the 12th floor. I walked down the hall toward my office past the conference room, where the 2 chairs sat in the corner, past the window that looked out over the Houston skyline, in the particular late October light that makes everything look slightly more permanent than it is. I stopped at my office door, reached into my jacket pocket. Helen's letter was there, folded into thirds slightly soft at the creases from a year of being carried. I had meant to put it back in the box on the shelf in the Claremont house. I had never quite managed to leave it behind. I did not take it out. I just held it through the fabric of my pocket for a moment, the way you hold something you are not ready to set down, even when you know that setting it down is eventually what you will have to do. Then I went inside, sat down at my desk, and got back to work. Some things you build in 20 years. Some things take longer. I won't pretend this family story ended perfectly. It didn't. I was a father who loved his son in all the wrong ways, protecting him from consequences instead of preparing him for them. Don't do what I did. Don't wait until a family betrayal forces the conversation you should have had years ago. Say the hard thing now, while there's still time. Here's what I believe: a name on a building means nothing without the character to carry it. A chair means nothing if you've never earned the right to sit in it. And loyalty, real loyalty, cannot be inherited. It has to be chosen every single day in the moments nobody is watching. In my darkest nights, I prayed not for things to go my way, but for the wisdom to let my son fall far enough to finally find solid ground. That prayer was answered slowly, painfully, and exactly right. This family betrayal almost broke us, but what nearly broke us became the thing that rebuilt us differently, honestly better. If this family story of lost consequence and grace stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment. I read everyone. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection. If that's not for you, no judgment, choose freely. But if you're staying, you won't regret it.